This is our last session of the day, and it's not so much, not the same kind of a session in the sense that this session is dedicated specifically to the work of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. So we have two speakers. We have first Mr. Eric Kite, who is, he serves as the lead democracy and human rights officer at USAID in Washington for the Latin America and the Caribbean Bureau. He oversees a portfolio of projects that includes various themes: civil society, rule of law, crime prevention, governance, and elections programming. He has an MA degree in German and European Studies from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Also studied at Mizzou, I understand that. Okay, beautiful campus. And he has been at USAID since 2001, I believe, if that's, no? Earlier than that. Earlier than that. Many, many years. We won't say how many, so you don't calculate his age. And then secondly, we will have Ms. Margot Ellis, who has more than 25 years in international development and human development at USAID. She serves currently as acting assistant to the administrator in the Bureau for Food Security. Previously served for 23 years as a U.S. Foreign Service officer, serving at the rank of minister counselor. And throughout her career at USAID, she has served in various countries around the world: Uganda, the West Bank and Gaza, South Africa, Zimbabwe. Has an MBA from Columbia University Graduate School of Business and a BS from Cornell University in Economics and Public Policy. So please help me welcome our USAID colleagues, Mr. Eric Kite and Ms. Margot Ellis.
Good afternoon, everyone. I brought my phone up here. I have it set on 12 minutes. When it goes off, I stop talking, and we can have that time for questions. First of all, let me thank Texas A&M and the Borlaug Institute for inviting USAID to be here today. It's really an honor and it's a privilege to be here and to represent the institution and talk a little bit about our work. My name is Eric Kite. I'm the Office Director for Central America and Mexico in our Latin America Bureau. And I think this is a nice capstone to how we started the day with Chairwoman Granger, because it's my job in part, along with that of my colleagues in the Bureau, to make those funds that she has worked so hard to make available and that the Congress have made available to actualize what we do with that money, with those resources, so that it does the most good for the most people. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. As was mentioned, my bio, I was formerly a democracy and governance officer and did that for 16 years. I've been in this portfolio of overseeing an office and having a little bit more of a policy role and a management role for the past 2 years. And one of the great advantages of that I have learned is that it has gotten me out of my stovepipe, my technical stovepipe, which was governance issues. And it allows me to do things like go to conferences on really interesting topics that go outside my normal silo, like agriculture. And I have to say, this one is particularly near and dear to my heart. I am one generation removed from a family farm. I grew up in Missouri. And I was glad someone mentioned 4-H. I was in 4-H in school. So I have been listening with kind of rapt attention all day, because I do think these issues are very important and I kind of feel them on a visceral level. You know, it's also really nice to be in Texas. I spent spring breaks in the Rio Grande Valley because my grandparents were snowbirds. And there's something about being in the middle of citrus groves in March when they're blooming that is an amazing experience that I will always associate with Texas. You know, there's also a special affinity between Missourians and Texans. And I don't know how many of you have read this, but if you grew up in Missouri, you have to read a lot about Harry Truman. Harry Truman, there's a great book about Harry Truman called Plain Speaking, which is basically a series of transcripts of oral interviews that he did And he talked about the special affinity he had for Texas members of Congress, for Texans in general, and his special relationship with Sam Rayburn. And when they got to the kind of, he went on about this at some length in this book. And when it got to, well, why do you think this is? And he was like, well, you know, Sam Houston and Stephen Austin, they were Missourians. So I think Missourians like to think that we have a special relationship with Texas. When I shared that anecdote with a taxi driver last night, he didn't think it was so funny. So hope it went over a little bit better here. But I do think it is really, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting us. So just to set the stage a little bit, I'm going to talk in broad, big picture terms about what USAID is planning to do in Central America over the next, we hope, years, and in kind of a broad context. And then when we get to the portion that is a little bit more specifically related to agriculture, I'm going to turn to my colleague Margot, who will be able to fill you in on some of the specific examples of what we're doing in the region. I guess I'd like to frame this first by starting kind of where Chairwoman Granger ended off this morning, which is, I think we're at a moment of tremendous opportunity. And it's a moment of opportunity that's born out of crisis, the way opportunities often are born out of crisis. The migration crisis that hit the news in 2014 galvanized attention, not only in the United States, but also in the region. The idea that families were voluntarily separating from their children and sending them on a dangerous journey to the United States, I think really captured attention not only here, but in the countries of the Northern Triangle, that something needed to happen. And I think the chairwoman was absolutely right that it galvanized attention in that the leaders of those three countries said, yes, we want our children back, and we want them to have a life here, so they don't have to have that, they don't have to make that choice. The result of that, she alluded to, is the Alliance for Prosperity. And just to lay this out, because it's a source of confusion not only outside the Beltway, but I would say inside the Beltway, and also I think in all the capitals in which many of you work. There is a difference between the Alliance for Prosperity, which is the plan of the three Northern Triangle governments, and we USAID, and I think the US government see as a really positive step forward in terms of an indication of political will to tackle some of the long-term drivers of poverty, of insecurity, of poor governance in the region. But it also represents a real tangible symbol of political will in terms of the investment that the three governments have made. In response, the US government and the Congress, and I would also underscore, this is a whole of government effort. I'm going to be speaking from the USAID point of view, but USAID is one part of a US government interagency that is working on these issues, and I would include the Congress in that as a stakeholder that appropriates the funds to us to be good stewards of those resources and to do the most good for the most people we possibly can. But the funds that are appropriated to us are not appropriated to the Alliance for Prosperity. They are not funds that are transferred to the three governments of the Northern Triangle. Instead, they are appropriated against what's called the US Strategy for Engagement in Central America. And that strategy is broadly supportive of the Alliance for Prosperity goals, but they are not a one-to-one match. They do not overlap 100%. And there are good reasons for that. We have US national interests that don't coincide with the national interest of our three partner governments in the Northern Triangle. We have priorities such as investing in human rights protections, not to say that those governments don't, but it is a high priority for certain members of Congress, for the administration. We have a real emphasis in our planning and investing in civil society engagement and civil society oversight. Those are things that aren't as prominent in the Alliance for Prosperity planning. And then another area where we're not completely in alignment is the Alliance for Prosperity makes some very important, places some very important priorities on areas of infrastructure investment that do need to happen, that are critical. The legislation that we received in 2016 specifically prohibits the U.S. government from investing in large-scale infrastructure. So the 2016 bill was $750 million for Central America. To place that into context, in 2014, we as an agency had $200 million for Central America. We're going to receive the lion's share, USAID is going to receive the lion's share of the $750 million. So we have, over the period of 2 years, in some cases with some of our missions, more than doubled and almost tripled the budgets that we have for the region. I was also really heartened by Chairwoman Granger's remarks about the sustained investment and the importance of strategic patience, because we see that too. From the development perspective, in our view, where we have done the best work that has been sustainable over the long term, it's where we've made investments strategically, well-planned, wisely, and over a long period of time. And I've been very heartened in, a big part of my job now is actually going up to Congress and talking to the staffers and telling them what we're doing with, this money that we don't actually have in hand yet, but we will, what the plans are. And what I've been very heartened by is over the 18 months that we've been doing this, almost 2 years now since the migration crisis started, there has been a seismic shift in Congress and I think also in Washington about how this problem is being viewed. The focus has really shifted from what can you do about the kids right now to how are we going to address the long-term drivers that leads people to leave their homes. And so what I keep hearing is we need a commitment to Central America like the commitment that we've made to Colombia under Plan Colombia over the last 15 years. And I think that's very good news. So that's another reason why I'm actually quite optimistic that this is a moment of opportunity. The U.S. strategy for engagement in Central America, which, as I mentioned, that's the strategy that we receive appropriated funds to do work under, has 3 pillars. One is security, and we've been doing security-related work in Central America since about 2008 when we received this appropriation under the Central America Regional Security Initiative. USAID's portion of that is community-level crime prevention. So State Department and other parts of the U.S. government do the heavy law enforcement work. USAID has done things like community outreach centers for at-risk youth, municipal crime prevention committees, working on community policing, working on improving public spaces. So if we recognize through the work of a local community that most crime is occurring at a certain choke point where people are getting off public transportation and walking home, and that seems to be a place where most of the crime is occurring, we're doing things about improving those public spaces. And the results have been really dramatic. And this is going to be a point I'm going to underscore over and over again. We, the U.S. government, can only be a small part of the solution. We're a part of it. We're very committed to it. But we really need, and we've been reaching out to other donors to be engaged, to the international financial institutions to be engaged. The IDB has taken a major role in the Alliance for Prosperity, and has really helped spearhead that effort. So I think with not only our attention, but the attention of other donors and a real commitment to aggressively monitoring and measuring what we're doing so we're accountable for results, I'm confident that we are going to start to see progress. And in our citizen security work, as I mentioned, we have seen dramatic improvements in community-level security in the areas where we've been doing these kinds of crime prevention approaches. If you're curious about this at all, you can come see me, but we did an independent evaluation with treatment and control groups with Vanderbilt University. The results are up on their website, and it's now a model that is being replicated by in other countries. The government of Honduras has put $2 million of their own resources into replicating the model. In El Salvador, their security plan, Plan Salvador Seguro, incorporates a lot of the best practices that, wow, that's 12 minutes already. Incorporates a lot of the best practices that came out of that study. So there's a lot of reason to be hopeful that models that work are being replicated and that we've moved on the security front from, again, kind of a seismic change over the period that I've been following these issues from a kind of mano dura, lock them all up and put them away approach to a much more balanced approach that really joins finding opportunities for at-risk youth, vocational training, safe spaces, additional education with the law enforcement side. The other two pillars, and I'm going to quickly turn to Margot so she can talk about the prosperity pillar, but the second pillar is governance. And governance is the glue that holds all of the sustainability of everything that we've been talking about today together. Without strong institutions that function, that deliver public services, none of this is going to be sustained. And I think that what we've seen in the Northern Triangle with our partner governments through the Alliance for Prosperity and the initiatives that they've prioritized there, through the commitment of the government of Guatemala to extend the mandate of CICIG, which is an independent anti-corruption investigation unit under the auspices of the UN. Honduras has just recently agreed to a similar mechanism under the auspices of the OAS that we are supporting. The age of impunity is maybe we've turned the corner. I think the events in Guatemala last year, the Guatemalan Spring, I think the extradition of some formerly untouchable, considered untouchable families or individuals in other countries has really signaled that the balance of impunity is starting to shift. So I also see a moment of opportunity here, and USAID plans to do a great deal of investment in institutional strengthening, on helping these governments to increase domestic revenue collection, which is a huge weakness, to work on civil service reforms, and also to engage with civil society so that civil society groups are more engaged in monitoring and oversight of what governments are doing, what their plans are, and holding governments accountable. On prosperity, which is the third pillar, we're doing a lot more investments in education than we have had the resources to do in the past few years. Our agency policy directs us to work on primary education. We have, and this has been mentioned in one of the panels earlier today, we're doing a lot of new work on workforce development. There will be more of that coming. Trade facilitation was brought up. We have a lot of projects that are coming online that are focused on trade facilitation. The fact that it does take the average traffic speeds for truck transit are 12 miles an hour. That is something that we are focused on, and we've been working with not only USAID, but with Customs and Border Protection and with other parts of the U.S. government to bring down experts to try to address some of those choke points. We're also doing small and medium enterprise development and small-scale infrastructure. So again, we're prohibited from doing large-scale infrastructure, but we are able to do farm-to-market access roads, and that is an emphasis that we're going to have in Honduras. Of those areas in prosperity, so I would say trade facilitation, small and medium enterprise development, work on value chains, phytosanitary work, and small-scale infrastructure, approximately 50% of that work is going to be focused on the agricultural sector. Of the three pillars, $750 million, it's about equitably split across those three pillars. So you can figure about $250 million going toward each of the three. USAID is going to have the lion's share of those resources in the prosperity pillar and in the governance pillar, with some shared work being done by the rest of the U.S. interagencies and also with other international partners. And then we are ramping up the work that we're doing in agriculture. And on that note, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Margot, who can talk in greater detail about some of the work that she's recently seen in the field and what our plans are going forward. As a final note for me to close, AID is a decentralized agency, and I think a lot of you probably find that a frustration at times in dealing with us, but it's both our greatest strength and maybe our greatest weakness in some ways. I happen to see when it comes to the balance, I think it's more of a strength than a weakness. We have great teams in the field. We have large missions. They need to be larger. I will disagree with the chairwoman on that. Our missions in Central America do need to be larger than they currently are. But we have large missions in all three countries, and we have a regional platform in San Salvador that administer these programs. And I would encourage you, if you're on the ground, that's your first point of contact, because they really know what's going on. They have they're given the accountability for the results. So they're the first place to touch base. So I'm optimistic. I think that there are several reasons here why we do have a moment of opportunity. It's coming out of a moment of crisis. It's coming out of a period of benign neglect. But I think that we've turned into a new phase, and I'm actually I'm really excited to be working on Central America right now, and really excited to be a part of working with you all on these issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it to my colleague Margot.
Thanks very much, Eric, and Elsa for hosting us here. Just in terms of background, since you talked a little bit about your background, I'm a little bit different. I grew up in New York City, so quite different. But I recently had the opportunity to speak at Purdue University. They had this summer institute, Food Security Institute, and they have graduate students and master's students. And really, they gather a group of about 40 students every summer and try to catalyze these young people to pursue careers in food security. Now, I was reflecting, as an undergrad, I went to Cornell University, which is half private university, half land-grant university, includes the agriculture school, which is a land-grant university. And I'm dating myself, but when I was an undergrad, being an Aggie was not cool, The kids who entered the ag school were kids who grew up in New York State, in the rural areas, and it was predominantly male. And I'm happy to report that the majority of the 40 students at that summer institute at Purdue University are now female, and they see that they're fantastic careers in food security, and it's not just, using a hoe in the field, but the high-tech careers, their creative careers, and I think a lot of what we're discovering in the United States really needs now to be disseminated and propagated in some of the countries that we work in overseas. I had the opportunity, I'm a career foreign service officer, spent 23 years overseas, and then I had the opportunity to work for the UN for 5 years between 2010 and 2015 in the Middle East. And when I came back to USAID, there were a couple of opportunities to rejoin. And one of them was working in the Bureau for Food Security on Feed the Future. And the reason I sought to work in this particular bureau and on Feed the Future was I'd been away for 5 years, and I wanted to make sure that I came back and worked in an organization and on issues that were really well integrated, and it wasn't just a pillar issue. So you're not just dealing with agriculture. It's agriculture and the nexus with climate change and women's issues and women's empowerment and health and nutrition. So that decision to come back really captures a lot of what Feed the Future is about. I also want to mention, because I'd be remiss in referring to Congresswoman Kay Granger earlier. And then one of the things that's very exciting that's happening is there were 2 pieces of legislation on the Hill, one in the House and one in the Senate, for the Global Food Security Act. And finally, after nearly 2 years of pushing, the Senate version of the bill has been voted out of committee in the House. So basically, July 5th or July 6th, a global food security bill will hopefully be enacted by the House of Representatives. And why this is particularly important, because Feed the Future and our work on global food security up to now has really been an executive branch priority. So all of a sudden, it's going to be not only an executive branch priority, but a legislative priority, and that will be continue to be well-resourced, thankfully. So that's a really important thing because it basically funds the work that USAID and other agencies work on. I've been talking a lot about Feed the Future. I shouldn't assume that everyone in this room knows what it is. So just in a nutshell, global food security and Feed the Future is the U.S. government's global food security and hunger initiative. And really, its focus is on smallholder farmers, especially women. And the idea is that we partner with host governments who have a commitment to the agricultural sector as a transformational sector to spur economic growth and trade in the interest of decreasing hunger and increasing incomes and decreasing malnutrition over the long term. So what's the hook with what Eric has to say earlier? And I think it's important to realize that, and I think it was another speaker early on who realized the importance of agricultural investments in agriculture as a poverty alleviation tool. So the link really is with the prosperity and regional integration pillar of the Central American strategy, because we realize that by improving agricultural productivity, we can also expand markets and trade, and for the most poor and the most vulnerable in rural areas, we also are working to increase their economic resilience. I briefly explained Feed the Future, and though I'm a representative of USAID, USAID's leadership is one of 11 different government agencies working on Feed the Future. We have a very active partnership with other U.S. government agencies, among them U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I see a colleague from Guatemala, who's based in Guatemala here today, but also with the MCC and Peace Corps, the Department of State. And as I said, it's a whole of government initiative, and the idea is to bring the complementary strengths of different agencies of the U.S. government together so that we can be the most impactful. The initiative started back in 2009, and it was after at a critical point after the global food price spikes of 2007 to 2008, when it was really a wake-up call to the global community that we couldn't continue to underinvest in agriculture. And the interesting thing was, this is the Borlaug Institute, that back in the days of the Green Revolution, 30 to 40% of USAID's resources were budgeted for agriculture. And over time, by 2006, it had dissipated over time, the percentage had declined to about 3%. And I think with global food price spikes, which really threw so many millions of people into poverty unnecessarily, I think there's a wake-up call to the global community that we had to do something, and we needed to invest seriously in this. So out of that came the Feed the Future, which was the U.S. government's initiative, but it was really complemented by, at the time, a G8 initiative and commitment from the other members of the G8. But it also changed the approach that we had to agriculture, because in the past it was very much a heavy focus on agricultural productivity. And we realized that, number one, it needed to be a whole of government effort, but also we decided to focus and concentrate, and we worked with selected countries. So the idea is that this is a partnership not only with other U.S. government agencies, but with host governments that share a similar vision and have demonstrated leadership. So we have 19 Feed the Future focused countries and a number of aligned countries. So we're not working everywhere. We've also worked, a key tenet is working on partnerships, partnering within the U.S. government, with host governments, but also with the private sector, with research institutions, both in the United States as well as in overseas contexts. We also have closely integrated our work on agriculture and nutrition, and with a very heavy emphasis on gender equity and women's empowerment issue. And we focus and concentrate in the particular countries in which we work. So, for example, we call them zones of influence. So we target specific geographies where there's a high incidence of poverty and stunting, and we focus on specific value chains and those that we feel that can really have a transformational effect on the economy. Two other operating principles of Feed the Future are that it's based on good science, and we've heard a lot about that today, but also strong metrics. So it's what Pamela Anderson had said earlier, we needed evidence. And the only reason that looks like we're going to have the Global Food Security Act that will be passed is that we've been able to produce results. And a lot of them will be announced later this year because we set some very ambitious high-level goals in terms of a 20% decline in stunting and extreme poverty in the geography in which we work. So as I said, we're accountable, and it's not just for these high-level goals, but also at the lower-level goals in terms of the number of farmers reached, the number of hectares planted with improved technology, and on and on and on. Now, to clarify, when I talk about agriculture, it's much more than just planting, and many of you know that. We're talking really, and we're trying to change the vocabulary of late, we're really talking about food systems, from research to farms to markets to tables. And that's part of the linkage with youth and really creating a lot of opportunities that perhaps youth have not seen before. So taking this to the Central American context, take Guatemala, for example. You've got 70% of those living in poverty are living in rural areas. And these are individuals who, by and large, live off the land for both food and income. And agriculture is an important part of the economy, employing 40% of the workforce and contributing 20% of GDP. And in Guatemala, we're focusing in the Western Highlands, where the majority of the population is indigenous. And unfortunately, it's got some catastrophic indicators in terms of poverty and stunting. Stunting rates there alone are about 67%, which are probably the highest in the world. So this is an area that we feel that has potential, but we really need to focus and concentrate on the 5 departments in Western Guatemala. In Honduras, another Feed the Future country, 45% of the population live in rural areas, and agriculture represents 14% of the GDP. And we're focusing on 6 departments in the western part of the country, which are the poorest, where there are 600,000 people living in extreme poverty. And when I say extreme poverty, we're using the 2011 indicator of less than $1.25 a day. And even in Guatemala, we're talking about 40% stunting rates. So we see real opportunities and real challenges in these particular geographies. And the challenge for us is getting to the people we work with, making sure that they have the right tools and technologies to work with. But yet we have some of the tremendous global challenges, climate change, the threat of urbanization, et cetera. And then just recently in Central America, El Nino, and La Nina, which will be continuing phenomenon that we're going to have to face in the future. So we really need to take a very comprehensive, multi-sectoral approach to food security and nutrition. Now, I'd be remiss in not saying something about the research partnerships that we have. We have 24 innovation labs, and these involve 70 universities in the United States. And we think of these as centers of excellence, and they work on an array of food security issues, from nutrition to aquaculture to horticulture to development of drought-resilient seeds to dealing with food processing and post-harvest handling, all these critical issues that are part of the food security landscape. So, for example, there is one of the labs, or the innovation labs that we work with, is led by Michigan State, and it's a Feed the Future Legume Innovation Lab. And what they're working on is particularly relevant to Central America. They're trying to develop climate-resilient and disease-tolerant beans, lentils, and peas, so that we can introduce better, more resilient varieties of these products, because they're so critical to dietary diversity and improved nutrition in Central America. So we have in Guatemala, for example, the Mas Frijol project, which is dealing with high-yielding disease-resistant bean varieties. And here, of course, at Texas A&M, or I guess it's at College Station, we're working on rust-resistant coffee varieties for smallholder farmers. Now, in addition to the university community, we're working with all the big names, I can say, in in the agri-food space, in the private sector agri-food space. We're, DuPont Pioneer, Monsanto, Starbucks, Keurig Coffee, Hershey's, Walmart, Tyson's Foods, Syngenta. And they're really important for the sustainability, that critical linkage to markets. So, of course, we can invest all we want in getting the best inputs, the best seeds, the best fertilizer, and good agronomic practices in place, but if farmers can't get their products to markets, we've lost the game. So we need to really involve the private sector and listen to them in terms of the types of products that they need. So one of the things that we're doing in Central America is a partnership that involves Starbucks and Keurig Green Mountain, as well as Root Capital, which is a financier. And it's called the Root Capital Coffee Farmer Resilience Fund, and it's working on coffee rust. And they're working with 40,000 coffee growers throughout the region to try to provide them with access to financial products and capital so that they can, when in the face of disease rust, be able to finance healthier plants and adapt to changing climate conditions. But importantly, we're also working with the coffee roasters so that they can negotiate the cost of combating coffee rust into their purchase contracts so that we have an eye to sustainable solutions. A very good partnership I wanted to mention is the one with the Dry Corridor Alliance, really led by the government of Honduras. And the reason is that it's not just USAID funding it. It's USAID, it's the European Union, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, the government of Canada, and importantly, the government of Honduras has a monetary stake in the game to address the challenges of the southern and western parts of the country, the dry corridor. And this is the type of partnership that we want to work together on to try to address the problems of extreme poverty and erratic climatic conditions that are affecting the populations in these areas. So I have had a number of, I'll cite a couple of examples. I had the opportunity earlier this year to travel to Guatemala and Honduras. And so on this trip to Honduras, I went to, excuse my pronunciation, I don't speak Spanish, Belén Manazapa. And I met a farmer who had 4/10 of a hectare, small farm, and he was growing maize, as his father had done. And he was saying that for every harvest, he had a profit of about $25 per harvest. And that was supposed to sustain him and his family. And I can't imagine being able to keep his children on the farm when that were the only resources that he had at his disposal. So through Feed the Future, we were able to work with farmers like this farmer and other farmers to introduce some new crops. And we introduced him to producing carrots. And instead of having a profit of $25 per harvest, that increased to $400 per harvest. So we provided the technical assistance for him to switch to the crops and access to an irrigation system. But the important thing was some of the business skills that were referred to earlier. We helped him to negotiate with a major supermarket chain in Honduras. And by being able, and for him, learning how to, what was the appropriate, how to price the product in terms of the cost of inputs, but importantly, how to adhere to a production schedule so that he and farmers like him could deliver on time and quality products to the market. So this is just a small anecdote of the type of work at a very human level. In Guatemala, where there's tremendous potential and tremendous work being done on exporting to the United States, I met with a cooperative that was working in French beans and snow peas. And they had, together they were building I guess it would be a processing facility, where initially they were going to be storing and sorting the beans and the snow peas that they were exporting to the States, but they had a vision of being able to eventually grade and do the actual packaging at basically the farm gate. So what we're trying to do in that case is to try to provide greater value added to farmers at the farm gate versus shipping it to an urban area and basically having the middleman or middlewoman capturing that profit. So how is this translated at a macro level? Well, the market for green beans between 2014 and 2015 in Guatemala, the exports captured, the market share captured by Guatemalan exporters to the United States grew in 1 year from 3.5% to 10.3%. So it has, it can have a very significant impact on the broader economy. So looking forward, where are we going with Feed the Future? What's next? I think what we have to do is take a look at what's worked and then build on there. Recognizing that the world has changed a lot since Feed the Future was first envisioned back in 2009. So in terms of what's worked and what's going to continue to be critical pillars in Feed the Future 2.0, which we're starting to design now, number one, country ownership continues to be important. We want to be invested. We want like-minded partners, be they in host governments or with the private sector and the universities. Nutrition, that's an area that we still need to focus on, given that 45% of the deaths of children under the age of 5 is caused by undernutrition. So this is an area we'll continue to focus on. Continue to focus on investing in women. We know that still women are disproportionately disadvantaged in accessing technical assistance, agriculture-related technical assistance, yet whatever assistance they do and whatever they earn, they will reinvest in their families and the health of their families. So I think that's another area that we'll continue to do. But looking around the world has changed a lot, as I mentioned, and some of the things that we're going to focus on more in the future. In terms of changing trends, urbanization. In Central and Latin America, you've seen that. It's, in Central America, Latin America, as well as in Asia, that the flood to the cities is already occurring, but it's just starting to occur in sub-Saharan Africa, which is another place where we work. So, trying to looking at the nexus and the problems of food insecurity in urban areas. Another is the whole question of youth, the youth bulge, and how to ensure that youth are seen, or large youth populations are seen as an opportunity for a country and not a demographic liability. How do we catalyze opportunities for that demographic? Another is the whole question of fragility and risk. Right now, about 40% of the populations living in insecure environments are living in fragile environments. We project by 2030, it's going to be the majority, about 62% of the population at a minimum. So how do we deal with these insecure spaces? How do we tailor our programs when we're talking about much more risk? And when I talk about risk, I'm not talking about only climatic risk, it's also conflict-related risk. So we're going to be investing all along the value chain and really focusing on not just what's done on the farm, but really those critical linkages that bring products to market. We're going to be focusing on a lot of our research on climate-smart solutions. So that's another thing that we're going to be talking about, and trying to make very visible the opportunities for youth to enter agriculture as a career. But all of this is really underpinned by the financing architecture for global food security. Donors have been generous up until now. Thankfully, the U.S. government has been of late, and we hope to continue in the future. But you just have to read the newspaper, with migrant flows into Europe, it's unrealistic to expect the broader donor community to continue to fund global food security at the levels that we have seen, at least in the last 5 years. But that's only one spigot of funding. So there's the official development assistance, which basically you can, if it remains stable, if it's plateaued, that's an optimistic scenario. But more realistically, it will probably decline over time. I'm not talking about USAID or the U.S. government per se, but I'm talking about all donor pots of money. But there are other important pots of money, and the other two pots of money are domestic resource mobilization and then sources of funding from the private sector. For domestic resource mobilization, actually in the agricultural space, the domestic resources from host governments actually are 10 times the size of that are contributed by donors right now, and there's an opportunity for those to expand. But, one thing is to have a government say they're investing a certain amount in agriculture and food security, but what we really need from those governments is to make sure that they're investing in the right things. I'll give you the example of Malawi. They're investing 17% of their national budget goes to agriculture, but the lion's share of it is going into unproductive fertilizer subsidies. So that's why they have to produce transparent spending plans so that it's evident to donors, but most importantly to the population at large, that the national governments invest smartly in agriculture and put in place the policies that will catalyze investment by the private sector. And we also, as donors, we have an opportunity to partner with the private sector to help de-risk some of these investments. So I think in looking forward, a lot of challenges before us, but it's a complicated and important challenge of addressing global food security. But I think I'm very optimistic about the path forward. I think it's because we have many partners. We're not going to be doing this alone. And everyone in this room has to be committed to the challenge. So we're looking to the private sector. We're looking to host governments. We're looking to donors, with the university research community. And we need to be committed for the long haul, because this is the problem of addressing global food security is not going to be solved overnight, although we'd love that. But I think there's a lot of momentum. And last year, in 2015, there were 3 very significant global events that happened that make me very optimistic. First of all, this is the earlier slide about the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals. And even though Sustainable Development Goal and hunger is goal number 2. If you look behind the 17, I've counted, I think, 15 that really relate to food security, whether we're talking about global climate change, extreme poverty, partnership, women's empowerment. Most of the 17 goals have to work together to contribute to solving the problem of global food security. The second thing that happened was COP21. A consensus around addressing global climate change. And the third important event of 2015 was the U.S. Financing for Development agenda, that we have to look at these various flows of resources into moving the world forward to make it a better, safer, more resilient space, and basically to contribute to the goals of ending hunger and poverty. So I think we're going to be in this for the long haul, but I think I'm optimistic, and I think we can all work together. There's tremendous promise and opportunity to work here in Central America. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions. Anybody who would like to? Come right up. Okay. Yeah, he's
good. I have a comment about I think some of the content of the last speaker, Ms. Ellis. I think it reminded me of the issue of food security and energy security, especially at the rural environment, where the people have to make a choice between using this plant either to have energy source to cook with, or for, food. And I think this is a major issue in some of these countries, and erosions that comes because people use these plants for energy, etc. Is there any initiative in the the USAID, to maybe focus on the issue of both food security and energy security in the rural environment?
One example that I can recall is the focus on healthy homes. This is a program that's going on in Honduras, and one of the things that we're working on is creating a healthy home environment, which includes the use of eco stoves, helping a family to put a cement floor down, coating the walls with lime to decrease disease. So I mean, there's a whole, at a very human level, at a household level, there are opportunities to employ, to both advance food security, but also do it in an environmentally and ecologically sustainable way.
What occurred to me immediately was post-earthquake in Haiti, I worked on the Haiti response, and that was together with the international community, the IDB, and other donors, there was a big push for more efficient cook stoves because of the gravity of the problem in Haiti with erosion, with the use of limited resources for charcoal. So I know that has been I think in cases like that, it's so extreme that it's facing you so gravely that you must confront it, and donors must confront it. But I think as we look toward climate smart agriculture, that's also a key part of the equation is how can we more efficiently help families to cook, to heat, et cetera. Yeah, solar has been also, I would not say that USAID is the leader on all of these. In fact, I think other donors have taken the leadership role on a number of the clean energies that we can learn from.
Just on your example of moving from $25 income a year to $400, that will be $1.10 per day. So we are helping to get people to earn $1. If they move to California, they will earn $15 an hour. And the same farmer in Guatemala, will be farming, the grape farms in California. So that's, one thing. I like your enthusiasm. I like that you are positive about this thing. The $740 million is, a huge increase. Just Salvadorians are sending $4,000 million to El Salvador. So let's hope that all of this will move that farmer not to $1 a day, but a little bit much higher.
I think the $750 million in that context is really important. Remittances flows dramatically outstrip what comes from traditional donors. The commitment of the 3 Northern Triangle governments to the Alliance for Prosperity is, in the last year, $2.6 billion. So again, that places our $750 million commitment of support in context. So I take the comment.
I also, just to clarify that the introduction of the carrots, it was it was $400 per harvest, so maybe it was the harvest of 3 times a year, so it was a little bit higher. But I think it's part of that. We see a lot of times working with farmers, especially with the indigenous community, it's a question of working iteratively to build trust. So you might start, okay, we'll start you plant tomatoes or cucumbers or carrots. And then the next thing is, I've seen farmers then move from there to taking a little piece of their land and using it for coffee. And part of it is trusting to diversify and diversify their risk. And to try to create these ladders out of poverty, it's a hard process. But trust is really important. So I know the initial step doesn't sound like much, but they can go much further than earning $1.25 a day.
Hi, my name is Rich Ambrose. I'm with Pomona Impact, and we're based in Guatemala. We're actually in the process of raising a $20 million fund to invest in agriculture technology as well as essential services, and are in the process of launching the first ag tech accelerator for Central America. One of the things that we often do with accelerators is look for winning technologies and business models elsewhere that have worked, and then find entrepreneurs willing to bring it to the region, and hopefully that can execute on the technology or business model well. And I was just curious, from your vantage point, if you all have seen examples of winning initiatives or technologies that you all are excited about backing to bring to the region.
this is probably not going to directly answer your question, but I think it's, rather than it being an innovative technology, it's an innovative approach that I'm very excited about. We have begun doing what we call broad agency announcements, and some missions are doing what they call broad mission announcements. And instead of USAID assuming that we, with our experts, can define the problem and define the solution and write a project description and put it out for competition, we have found a much more flexible process that allows us to bring, let's say, a broad group of stakeholders that may or may not be interested in bidding on an aid project or being a recipient of aid resources, but who are experts, and basically helping us to crowdsource the solution to a problem. So we'll come up with we together with the group will come up with the problem statement, and then through an iterative process of conferences, workshops, everyone will kind of bring their opinion to the table with the understanding they may or may not receive any funding at the end of it. They just want to be a part of trying to find a solution. And we've now used this for several initiatives that have come up with solutions that aid by itself would not have come up with. So I think it's a very interesting and innovative approach that I'm excited about in terms of its potential development impact. It doesn't answer your question about a specific sort of new technology or a new approach, but it is a new approach, and I think it's promising.
I mean, we have a program called Partnering for Innovation. You probably know about, but one of the things that that it brought was to take shelf-ready technologies and bring it at an affordable cost to smallholder farmers. So a lot of the work in drip irrigation was done. There was one project that dealt with, it was called irrigation in a box. It was a system that was cost-effective, lent itself to a local manufacturer, but that a farmer could set up in 3 hours. I know Zamorano University did some work in beneficial nematodes, and that's scaling. A lot of the challenges that we have, and you're basically looking for new technologies. A lot of the new technologies are coming out of these innovation labs, but the research community and the university community have to hook up with the private sector to take those, be able to scale those types of innovations. So I think speak to some of the people around the table, because that's one of the challenges that we're facing is to, and we're doing a lot of work in trying to marry the university community who have produced these fantastic new ideas from new types of mobile technologies to being able to scale them. So, whether you're talking of new methods of communicating, new methods of, meteorological monitoring, I mean, they're coming out of the universities, but oftentimes they're not making the connection to bring them to scale at an affordable cost for smallholder farmers. So speak to the colleagues around the room.
One last question.
Hi, I'm Paul McNamara, University of Illinois. I direct two USAID projects and Feed the Future. I'd like you to please speak a bit about USAID Forward and how the agency sees efforts to work with more local implementing partners. What are successes? What are lessons learned? Some of those kinds of things around USAID Forward.
I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with USAID Forward, it was an initiative to try, one of the tenets was to work increasing with local partners. In Honduras, we have a government-to-government partnership in implementing our agricultural programs there, and it's going well. Similar types of arrangement we'll be working in West Africa with the Ghanaian government. So, but in order for us to partner with host governments directly, and when I say partner, meaning that we have the same system and the money is transferred to them, there has to be accountability systems and good procurement systems on the part of those governments. So it is really a system of trust and accountability that is ceded to the host governments we work with. But importantly, that we look for implementing partners, local implementing partners. I don't have the statistics but I know that we are increasingly looking for local capable partners when we can. I think to the extent that we, even in the research communities, so many of these research projects, they might be housed within U.S. universities, but they're always seeking local partners through overseas universities and research institutes.
I think a particular challenge of USAID Forward, and I think it was pointed to in the earlier presentation from the presenter from Universidad de La Valle, is that it's a steep learning curve for the local partner. It's resource intensive in terms of aid officers' time, because we have a lot of federal regulations that our partners have to meet, and it's a steep learning curve, but I completely take on board and agree that the upfront cost is worth the long-term benefit. That the benefits in terms of the externalities that partner is able to bring that we can't even quantify upfront, the sustainability that it leaves behind, it is where we aspire to go. In programs like Paraguay, 100% of the USAID program in Paraguay is done through local partners. Increasingly, I think in Mexico, we're up to a significant portion of the USAID Mexico portfolio that is done through local partners. That is where we want to go. Especially in this moment where we're seeing such dramatic increases in our budgets for Central America, it's hard to do that because we don't have the number of staff we need in the field yet. We are under tremendous pressure, as Ambassador Nacios referred to earlier, to move the money. Like, what are the results this quarter? It's hard in that environment when we're under that level of scrutiny to set aside the time that's required to prioritize local solutions. We'll do it, and we're going to do it, but it's difficult. I think that's a real challenge that both partners need to be cognizant of.
And just to note, the majority of our staff in our overseas missions are what we call Foreign Service Nationals. They're locals, and we cannot touch the knowledge that they have because of the local economy and cultural and socio-political systems. So they are such a critical, really a bulwark of our USAID programs in the overseas context.
I just want to say one last thing. This is the first time in my entire career that I've been able to come to a conference that I'll be able to go home and tell my family about, and they will, first of all, understand it, and secondly, they will appreciate it. So thanks again to Texas A&M for giving me this opportunity. After 18 years in federal service, they're not going to wonder why or what this governance conference was about or what this elections conference was about. They will inherently understand the value of my participation here today. So thank you for that.
That's wonderful. Help me thank our panelists here.